Please do not buy me. Caleb Morgan stopped beneath the cold white lights of Orion Gate Transfer Hall, with one hand still wrapped around a replacement fuel control valve he had come to purchase. The voice was familiar. That was impossible enough. The words were worse. He turned toward Transfer Desk 9 and saw Leora Vin standing behind a thin blue boundary line. 7 months had passed since Rook Mining Station, but he recognized her immediately. Cobalt blue skin, silver white hair, large golden eyes with diamond-shaped pupils. Fine ridges traced her high cheekbones, and pale cyan markings glowed faintly along her temples. She wore a plain gray work uniform with an identification band around one wrist. No restraints, no guards. Nothing about the clean transfer hall looked like a prison. Then Caleb saw the terminal beside her. Third assignment pending. His stomach tightened. Leora. Her eyes found him. Surprise appeared first, then fear. Not fear of him. Fear of what he might decide to do. Caleb, she said quietly. Walk away. He looked from her to the contract terminal. Numbers moved beneath her identification record while several remote bidder indicators waited in separate columns. What is this? Not your problem. That is not an answer. A station clerk behind the desk looked up. Sir, please remain outside the transfer boundary unless you intend to participate. Caleb glanced at the glowing line beneath his boots. Participate in what? Leora closed her eyes for half a second. Caleb, what are they transferring? The clerk answered with the bored professionalism of someone explaining docking fees. Employment assignment rights associated with an active relocation debt contract. Caleb looked at Leora. Your contract? Yes. I thought you worked maintenance at Rook. I did. You told me you were transferring. I was transferred. The difference landed slowly. Caleb remembered their night inside Rook Station's engineering bay. Leora correcting his coolant calculations. Leora insulting human coffee with scientific precision. Leora disappearing before he departed the next morning. He had assumed she found another job. Third assignment, Caleb said, reading the display. This happened twice already. More than twice. Assignments can change without a formal transfer. A soft chime sounded. One bidder updated its offer. Leora's cyan markings dimmed. Caleb noticed. How long have you been under this contract? For years. For years. Please lower your voice. Caleb looked around. Nobody else seemed disturbed. Travelers crossed the hall carrying luggage. Clerks processed documents. A family ate something from a paper container 20 feet away. Ordinary life continued around a woman whose future was being priced on a screen. Can you leave? Caleb asked. Leora looked at him as though the question belonged to another universe. Not without settlement. How much? Do not. How much, Leora? More than you have. Caleb almost answered automatically, then stopped. She knew enough about the North Star to make that estimate. 7 months earlier, she had spent an entire shift inside his aging cargo tug. She knew exactly how little luxury existed aboard it. Another terminal chime sounded. Caleb looked at the bidder columns. What happens when this closes? The new assignment holder selects my work location. And if you refuse? Leora did not answer. She did not need to. Caleb stepped closer to the blue line. Show me the settlement amount. Her expression hardened. No, why? Because I remember you. Caleb frowned. That is usually considered helpful. You offered me transportation from Rook without asking for payment. I remember. I would like to keep remembering you that way. Caleb understood then. She was not afraid he would fail to help. She was afraid he would succeed in the wrong way. You think I am going to bid? I think good intentions become complicated when money enters the room. Caleb looked at the contract display. And if I did? Her golden eyes held his. Then somebody kinder would own the decision. The sentence removed every clever answer he might have given. Caleb looked at the clean floor, the blue boundary line, the identification band, the calm bidder indicators. Then back at Leora. When does this close? She hesitated. 9 tomorrow morning. Caleb checked the time. 6:42 p.m. 14 hours and 18 minutes. Caleb. What? Please do not turn me into something you need to save. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the fuel control valve on an empty counter. Fair enough. Leora's shoulders loosened slightly. Caleb pulled out his wrist terminal. I will start by finding out what needs to end. 7 months earlier, the North Star had arrived at Rook Mining Station with a coolant regulator that sounded like a metal spoon trapped inside a washing machine. Caleb had spent 40 minutes pretending the noise was normal before Leora appeared beside the open engine compartment. Your secondary regulator is failing. Caleb slid out from beneath the coolant manifold and looked up at the cobalt blue mechanic standing over him. That is a very negative way to introduce yourself. Would you prefer inaccurate information? Usually before dinner, yes. Leora ignored that and crouched beside the diagnostic panel. Back then, Caleb had assumed the identification band around her wrist was standard station equipment. He had assumed the gray uniform meant she worked for Rook because she had chosen the job. He had assumed many things because nobody had given him a reason not to. Your pressure differential is 12% above tolerance, she said. Caleb checked his scanner. 11.8. Her golden diamond-shaped pupils narrowed. You are arguing over 0.2% while your regulator is failing. I am establishing professional credibility. You are losing. She was right. Caleb disliked her immediately for approximately 3 minutes. Then she found the cracked thermal sensor he had missed, and dislike became professional respect. They spent the next 8 hours rebuilding the regulator with parts scavenged from 2 incompatible systems. Caleb knew human engines. Leora understood Avery thermal architecture. Between them, the North Star slowly stopped sounding terminally offended. Near midnight, Caleb returned from a vending alcove carrying 2 cups. Coffee. Leora smelled hers. Why? That is a surprisingly philosophical question. She tasted it and stared at him. This is terrible. Rook Station charges extra for disappointment. Humans conquered interstellar travel before improving this. Priorities. A faint cyan glow appeared along her temples. Caleb eventually learned that meant amusement. They sat on the cargo ramp while the regulator completed its pressure cycle. Beyond the docking shield, mining vessels crossed the black sky in slow lines of navigation lights. How long are you staying here? Caleb asked. Leora looked toward the identification band around her wrist. I do not know. Better offer somewhere else. Something like that. Caleb noticed the answer, but not what it meant. North Star leaves tomorrow afternoon. Kepler route, then Orion Gate. You travel alone? Mostly. Less arguing. You argue with machinery. Machinery deserves it. Leora looked toward the old cargo tug. Its hull carried 12 years of repairs, mismatched panels, and 1 navigation lamp Caleb kept promising to replace. You like that ship? She is home. The word changed something in Leora's expression. You can choose where your home goes. Caleb frowned. That is generally the advantage of putting engines on it. She looked away. He should have understood then. Instead, he mistook sadness for curiosity. If you ever need transport, Caleb said, find the North Star. Leora turned back. What would you want in return? A better coolant regulator. I am serious. So am I. This one has insulted me personally. Nothing else. Caleb shrugged. You helped me. Maybe someday I help you. Leora studied him for several seconds, as if searching for hidden conditions. Humans make very careless agreements. That is why we invented lawyers. The next morning, Caleb returned to the maintenance bay with breakfast and found her workstation empty. Tools gone. Locker cleared. When he asked the supervisor, the answer was 2 words. Contract reassignment. Caleb had assumed Leora had accepted another position. He left Rook that afternoon and thought about her occasionally whenever the repaired regulator behaved perfectly. Now, 7 months later, under the white lights of Orion Gate Transfer Hall, Caleb finally understood what reassignment had meant. Leora had not chosen another job. Someone else had chosen where she would go. He lowered his wrist terminal and looked across the blue boundary line at her. That night on Rook, he said, when you asked what I wanted in return. Leora's expression tightened. Yes. You were not being cautious. I was being experienced. Caleb looked at the identification band he had once mistaken for an employee credential. And when I offered you a ride, I wanted to say yes. The answer was barely louder than the terminal hum. Why did you not? Leora looked toward the contract display. Because by morning, somebody had already decided where I was going next. Caleb looked at the contract display until the moving numbers stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like machinery. A system. Inputs, outputs, penalties, fees. Something designed by people, which meant somewhere inside it there had to be a reason it worked the way it did. Start at the beginning, he said. Leora's golden eyes narrowed. Why? Because 4 years ago you signed something. I want to know what. You are still trying to fix this. I'm trying to understand it. She glanced toward the clerk, then back at Caleb. There is a difference? Usually. Leora hesitated. I was 23. The Avery colony where I lived was losing industrial contracts. Employment disappeared faster than people could relocate. So somebody offered relocation. Transportation to frontier stations. Housing. Guaranteed technical work. For a fee. A debt. Caleb nodded toward the terminal. How much? Leora named the original amount. Caleb frowned. That is not small, but 4 years of mechanic wages should have covered it. It should have. What happened? She touched the display and opened the account history. The list kept scrolling. Housing assessment. Transit insurance. Equipment lease. Processing fee. Assignment administration. Contract transfer surcharge. Caleb read the last item twice. They charged you for being transferred. Yes. Did you request the transfer? No. Then why were you charged? Leora's expression held no surprise. She had asked that question years ago. Because the contract permits administrative reassignment when a holder changes staffing requirements. Caleb scrolled farther. And every reassignment adds fees. Yes. Which increases the debt. Yes. Which extends the contract. Yes. Caleb looked at her. How much have you paid? The cyan markings along her temples dimmed. Enough to owe more. Caleb stopped scrolling. The sentence sat between them while Orion Gate continued humming around it. He returned to the first page. The original debt was less than half the current balance. This is not repayment. I know. It is circulation. Leora looked at him. What? The contract keeps moving you because moving you generates charges. The charges keep the contract alive. Caleb studied the legal options. Appeal. Filed twice. Result. First denied. Second scheduled for review in 5 months. Caleb checked the deadline. Your assignment closes tomorrow morning. Yes. Debt restructuring? Requires approval from the current holder. Independent sponsorship? Leora's expression hardened. Do not. Caleb looked up. Why? Because sponsorship transfers the outstanding obligation to the sponsor. That sounds useful. And grants assignment rights until repayment. Caleb understood. So the sponsor decides where you work. Where I work. How long. Whether another assignment is permitted. Her voice remained calm. That is not freedom, Caleb. It is choosing a kinder owner. He closed the sponsorship window immediately. All right. Leora seemed surprised that he did not argue. Then there is only settlement, he said. Yes. Show me. No, Leora. You cannot pay it. That is my problem. No. She stepped closer to the blue boundary. That is exactly how this becomes my problem again. Caleb went quiet. Leora continued. Someone sees the number. They decide they can rescue me. Then money changes hands, and suddenly kindness has expectations. I am not asking you for anything. Not yet. The words were not cruel. That made them harder to dismiss. Caleb looked at the terminal. Then do not trust me. Leora blinked. What? Trust the paperwork. Show me the settlement clause. If there is no path that ends with you owing nobody anything, I walk away. She studied him for a long moment. Then she opened the final settlement screen. The number appeared in cold white digits. 184,600 credits. Caleb read it once. Then again. His savings were nowhere close. Even his cargo reserve would barely change the first 3 digits. I told you, Leora said. Caleb checked the time. 7:16 p.m. 13 hours and 44 minutes remained. If that balance is paid in full before 9 tomorrow, what happens? The debt becomes eligible for closure. Eligible. A third-party payer must choose whether to accept assignment rights or permanently waive them. Caleb looked at her. There it was. The part that mattered. So somebody can pay this and terminate everything. Yes. No service obligation afterward. None. No repayment claim. Not if they waive it. Caleb stared at the number. Leora watched his face. You do not have that much. No, then stop. Caleb slipped his wrist terminal into his jacket. I need to check something. Her expression changed immediately. Caleb. He stepped away from the boundary. What? Do not promise you are coming back. Caleb looked at her beneath the cold station lights. I was not going to. He turned toward the docking corridor. I was going to find out what the North Star is worth. The North Star waited in berth 206 beneath the blue docking lights of Orion Gate, looking exactly as Caleb had left her that morning, old, patched, and stubbornly functional. He stopped at the bottom of the boarding ramp. 12 years. That was how long the cargo tug had been his. 12 years of coolant leaks, late payments, improvised repairs, bad meals, and waking to the steady vibration of engines beneath his bunk. Caleb placed his palm against the hull. Do not make this sentimental. The North Star answered with the familiar hum of her circulation pumps. Good talk. Inside, the air smelled of warm electronics and machine oil. Caleb entered the cockpit and opened the station's commercial registry. Vessel appraisal. He entered the North Star's identification code. The system processed for 11 seconds before displaying a number. Caleb leaned back. That is insulting. The number was better than his savings. Still nowhere near enough. He opened his financial accounts. Personal savings. Cargo reserve. Emergency maintenance fund. He added everything. Still short. Caleb moved through the ship with his wrist terminal, inventorying anything that could legally be sold before morning. Spare coolant pumps. Backup navigation array. Sealed fuel injectors. 2 unused atmospheric regulators. A diagnostic suite he had bought 3 years earlier and barely touched because the old one still worked. The total climbed. Not enough. He sold his next cargo contract back to the broker. Cancellation penalties took a painful percentage. Still short. Caleb stood in the engineering compartment staring at the regulator Leora had repaired 7 months earlier. It was running perfectly. Of course you are. His terminal chimed. A message from Orion Gate Brokerage appeared. They had received his request for immediate asset liquidation. A verified commercial buyer could purchase the North Star, freight license, and registered equipment as a single package through station escrow. Estimated clearance time, before 8 a.m. Caleb read the offer twice. Enough. Barely. The cockpit suddenly felt quieter. He walked back through the narrow corridor. The galley table where he had eaten hundreds of meals. The storage locker with a dent from his first year aboard. The pilot seat shaped by 12 years of use. Above the cockpit entrance hung a small brass nameplate. North Star. Caleb removed the 2 screws holding it in place. The plate felt heavier than it should have. His wrist terminal requested confirmation. Liquidate vessel, commercial license, and registered assets. Caleb looked through the forward glass at Orion Gate's docking ring. Beyond it, stars burned without caring who owned what. His finger hovered over the confirmation field. Then his terminal chimed with an incoming call. Leora. Caleb answered. You should not do this, she said immediately. Hello to you too. The clerk told me you requested information about third-party settlement. That seems like a privacy problem. Caleb. He sat in the pilot's seat. I have not paid anything. But you are trying. I am checking numbers. You are sitting on the North Star, are you not? Caleb glanced around. How did you know? Because you looked at 184,600 credits and immediately thought of your ship. You have an uncomfortable amount of confidence in my predictability. Do not sell your home. The words came softer now. Caleb looked at the brass nameplate in his hand. You called it my home once. Because it is. Was. Silence followed. Caleb, listen to me. I have survived this contract for 4 years. That is not an argument for a 5th. You barely know me. I know enough. Enough for what? Caleb looked toward the engine status display. Every system glowed green. The North Star had never been more ready to leave. Enough to know that you should get to decide where you wake up tomorrow. Leora did not answer. Caleb continued before she could turn the sentence into a promise. I am not asking you to trust me. Then what are you asking? Nothing. Nobody gives up this much for nothing. Maybe that is the problem. Another silence. When Leora spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. If you come back with that money, I will never know how to repay you. Caleb looked at the liquidation confirmation still waiting on his screen. Then do not. He ended the call before either of them could make the moment larger than it needed to be. The cockpit returned to its familiar hum. Caleb rested the brass nameplate on his knee. 12 years, he said. The North Star's ventilation fan rattled overhead. Caleb smiled faintly. You always did have terrible timing. He pressed confirm. The commercial registry accepted the liquidation request. Buyer verification in progress. Caleb sat alone in the pilot's seat while the station began calculating what 12 years of his life were worth in credits. The North Star sold at 7:41 the next morning. Caleb watched the station escrow notification appear on the cockpit display while Orion Gate's artificial dawn brightened the docking ring beyond the forward glass. Verified buyer. Ownership transfer authorized. Funds released. He checked the amount once, then again. Combined with his savings and the assets sold overnight, it was enough. Not comfortably enough. Not enough to leave much afterward. Just enough. Caleb sat in the pilot's seat for another minute and listened. The circulation pumps hummed beneath the floor. The ventilation fan rattled above him. Somewhere behind the bulkhead, the repaired coolant regulator maintained perfect pressure with the quiet competence Leora had given it 7 months earlier. Typical, Caleb murmured. You finally behave when I sell you. He packed one duffel bag. Clothes. Personal documents. A compact toolkit. 3 photographs printed on actual paper. The brass North Star nameplate went on top. Everything else belonged to somebody else now. At 8:03, Caleb stepped through the airlock and placed his hand against the hull one last time. No speech came. That surprised him. 12 years deserved something dramatic, but all he managed was, take care of the next idiot. Then he walked away. Across Orion Gate, Leora stood inside transfer hall with 57 minutes remaining. The blue boundary line glowed beneath her boots. Her identification band displayed the same contract number she had worn through 4 years, 3 formal assignments, and more administrative transfers than she wanted to count. She had not slept. Caleb had not contacted her since ending their call. She told herself that was good. He had reconsidered. He had understood that destroying his own life would not repair hers. At 8:17, the clerk placed a transfer authorization screen in front of her. The incoming assignment holder has completed financial verification. Leora read the destination. Telos Processing Complex. Mechanical Systems Division. Minimum service period. 14 months, subject to reassignment. She almost laughed. Subject to reassignment. 2 words capable of swallowing years. Final processing begins at 8:55, the clerk said. Transfer executes automatically at 9. Leora nodded. At 8:24, Caleb entered Orion Gate Financial Services carrying his duffel bag. The certified settlement transfer required identity verification, escrow confirmation, tax clearance, and an expedited processing fee that Caleb considered personally offensive. How long, he asked. The financial officer checked the system. Standard clearance is 90 minutes. Caleb looked at the clock. I have 36. Expedited certification is available. Of course it is. There is an additional fee. Of course there is. The fee reduced his remaining balance to an amount that would barely cover a civilian ticket and several days of cheap food. Caleb approved it. At 8:39, the settlement key turned green. He started toward transfer hall. Orion Gate was nearly 2 miles across from financial services to the contract exchange. The direct transit tram would take 6 minutes. Caleb reached the platform just as a maintenance notice appeared. Service delay. Estimated resumption, 12 minutes. Caleb stared at it. You have got to be kidding me. He tightened the strap on his duffel bag and took the pedestrian corridor. At 8:48, Leora watched the first transfer documents populate the terminal. She looked toward the entrance. Empty. She hated herself for doing it. Caleb had never promised to return. She had specifically told him not to. That should have made this easier. Instead, Hope had entered anyway, careless and unwanted. At 8:53, the clerk activated final processing. Please verify your identity. Leora placed her hand on the scanner. Her identification band flashed amber. At 8:55, the incoming assignment holder confirmed acceptance. At 8:57, the settlement option remained available for 2 more minutes. Leora looked toward the entrance again. Still empty. She lowered her eyes. Good intentions always became expensive eventually. At 8:58, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Fast. Human. Leora looked up. Caleb came through the doors breathing hard, work jacket open, one duffel bag hanging from his shoulder. He looked like a man who had run nearly 2 miles and regretted every life decision that had made it necessary. The clerk frowned. Sir, final transfer processing has begun. Caleb placed the certified settlement key on the counter. Then we should probably hurry. Leora saw the green authorization light. Then she saw the brass edge of the North Star nameplate inside his open bag. Her face changed. Caleb, he did not look at her yet. What is the exact settlement balance? The clerk stated it. 184,600 credits. Caleb pushed the key forward. Verify the funds. The clerk inserted it into the terminal. The screen flashed green. Full settlement available. Leora stared at Caleb. You sold her. Caleb finally met her eyes. Yes. Your ship. Yes. Your home. He glanced toward the clock. 8:59. Leora, we can argue about my financial judgment later. The clerk looked between them. Mr. Morgan, if you intend to settle this contract, I need your instruction now. Caleb turned back to the terminal. I am here to make sure there is no contract left to transfer. The clerk pulled the settlement key closer, but did not process it. Before funds are transferred, you need to select a legal disposition. Caleb glanced at the clock. 8:59. Explain quickly. Under Orion Gate Frontier Contract Law, a verified third-party settler may accept assignment rights after satisfying the outstanding balance, or permanently waive those rights and terminate the service obligation. Leora went still. Caleb looked at the terminal. Two options appeared beneath his authorization record. Assignment. Termination. Termination, he said. The clerk raised one hand. You should understand the financial consequence. If you accept assignment, the contract permits recovery of your settlement through continued service. Not interested. The amount is 184,600 credits. I remember. I spent all night becoming familiar with it. Permanent termination means you surrender any right to repayment, employment service, reassignment authority, or future contractual claim. Caleb looked at Leora. Good. The cyan markings along her temples brightened sharply. Caleb, wait. His hand stopped above the confirmation field. What? She stepped closer to the blue boundary. If you accept assignment, I can repay you. No, you sold the North Star. Yes. Your freight license? Included. Your equipment? Most of it. Then you cannot throw away the only way to recover what you lost. Caleb looked at the brass nameplate visible inside his duffel bag. I am not recovering it from you. Why? Because that would leave the same contract alive with my name attached to the other side. You would not treat me like the others. That is not the point. Leora stared at him. The transfer hall continued around them with maddening normality. Terminals chimed. Travelers crossed polished floors. Somewhere overhead, a station announcement reminded passengers to keep personal belongings with them. Caleb pointed toward the contract screen. You told me yesterday that choosing a kinder owner was not freedom. Leora's expression changed. I remember. So do I. The clock changed to 9 o'clock. The incoming assignment indicator flashed, waiting for final execution. The clerk spoke calmly. Settlement authorization will override the pending transfer if you confirm now. Caleb selected termination. A second warning appeared. Permanent waiver. No repayment claim. No service rights. Irreversible. Confirm, Caleb said. Verbal confirmation recorded. The clerk replied. Processing. The settlement key flashed white. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the number beside Leora's name began falling. 184,600. 92,300. 46,150. 0. The incoming assignment holder disappeared from the screen. Leora's identification band gave a soft tone. Its amber status light turned white. Contract balance, 0. Service obligation, none. Assignment rights, none. Caleb exhaled. He had not realized he was holding his breath. Leora stared at the screen. So now you own the contract. Caleb shook his head. No, you paid it. Yes. Your name is on the settlement record. As the person who paid it. She looked toward the clerk. What authority does he have over me? The clerk checked the completed waiver. None. Leora blinked. None. Mr. Morgan permanently surrendered all assignment and repayment rights. Your relocation contract is closed. Leora looked down at the identification band as though it belonged to somebody else. What am I required to do now? The clerk seemed confused. Nothing under this agreement. Where am I assigned? Nowhere. Who approves my next employment? You do. Silence. Caleb watched the meaning arrive slowly. For years of rules had apparently made freedom sound like missing instructions. Leora turned toward him. What do you want from me? Caleb had expected the question. It still hurt to hear. Nothing. You sold everything. Not everything. I still have 3 shirts and an extremely judgmental wrench. Caleb. I know. His voice softened. I want you to stop having to ask people that. Her golden eyes held his. Nobody spends 184,600 credits for nothing. Caleb glanced at the white light on her wrist. I did not spend it for nothing. He stepped backward from the blue boundary. I spent it so that line does not get to tell you where to stand anymore. Leora looked down. Slowly, Almost experimentally, she lifted one foot and stepped across the glowing boundary. No alarm sounded. No clerk objected. She took another step. Then she stood beside Caleb, free of the line for the first time since he had found her. The cyan markings along her face glowed brighter than he had ever seen them. Caleb adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder. There. Much better. Leora looked at him, then at the terminal showing 0. What happens now? Caleb glanced toward the departure boards beyond the hall. Hundreds of destinations moved across them in quiet rows of light. For once, he said, that is entirely up to you. Leora remained beside Caleb after crossing the blue boundary, but she did not move toward the exit. Her white identification light reflected against her cobalt blue wrist. You said what happens next is my decision. That is usually how freedom works. Usually? Humans like exceptions. Leora looked toward the departure boards beyond the transfer hall. Hundreds of destinations shifted across the displays. Kepler Junction, Vega Reach, New Boston, Helios Station. Places she could technically choose now, which somehow made choosing one harder. What if I choose incorrectly? She asked. Caleb adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder. Then you choose again. Her golden eyes moved toward him. You can do that. Constantly. Most people call it making mistakes. For 4 years, mistakes were added to my debt. Caleb's humor disappeared. Not anymore. Leora looked down at the identification band. Slowly, she unclasped it. A faint pale line remained beneath the metal where it had rested against her skin for years. She held the band for several seconds before placing it on the transfer counter. Do I need to return this? The clerk checked his terminal. No, Leora left it anyway. Caleb understood. Some things did not deserve luggage space. They walked into the main concourse together. Orion Gate sounded different outside the transfer hall. Boarding announcements echoed beneath the high ceiling. Restaurant vents carried the smell of toasted bread and synthetic bacon. Travelers hurried between terminals while cleaning drones moved quietly along the floor. Leora stopped after 20 feet. Caleb noticed. Problem. Nobody is expecting me anywhere. That sounds like the opposite of a problem. It does not feel like one. She looked around. It feels like standing in a room with no walls. Caleb considered that. Breakfast. Leora blinked. What? When the universe becomes philosophically overwhelming, Americans eat breakfast. Is that an official cultural practice? Extremely. They found a small diner overlooking the docking ring. Caleb ordered eggs, potatoes, toast, and coffee. Leora ordered the same after asking the server enough questions to make Caleb regret introducing her to menus. She tasted the coffee and immediately frowned. 7 months. And your species has made no progress. We have been busy. Through the window, berth 206 was visible across the docking ring. The North Star sat beneath inspection lights while technicians wearing another company's uniforms moved around her hull. Leora followed Caleb's gaze. You miss her? Already. Then why are you smiling? Because the coolant regulator still works. Leora stared at him. That is your concern? You spent 8 hours fixing it. I would hate for the new owner to get a discount. Her cyan markings brightened, but the humor faded quickly. Caleb, you gave up your home. I sold a ship. You called it home. Both statements can be true. Leora placed her cup down. I still do not understand. Which part? Why me? Caleb looked through the window at the North Star. This was never about you being special enough to justify a price. Her expression tightened, but he continued. That is the same logic the contract used. Putting numbers beside people. Deciding what somebody is worth. He turned back to her. I saw a system that could be ended. I had something valuable enough to end it. That's simple. No, Caleb looked again at the ship. Simple and easy are different things. Leora was quiet. What will you do now? She asked. Kepler Junction has a repair yard hiring propulsion mechanics. You checked. While running here. I multitask badly but enthusiastically. And how will you get there without the North Star? Civilian liner. Leora's mouth curved faintly. You as a passenger? Please show appropriate respect during this difficult transition. She laughed. Caleb smiled and returned to his breakfast. After a moment, Leora picked up her coffee again despite clearly disliking it. When do you leave? Day after tomorrow. Why not today? Because I can afford one cheap room for 2 nights, and I would like at least 48 hours before making another financially catastrophic decision. Leora looked toward the departure boards outside the diner. 2 days. Yes. She nodded slowly. as though storing the information rather than accepting an invitation. Caleb did not offer one. That mattered. When breakfast ended, they reached the concourse and stopped beneath the changing destination lights. "Where are you going?" Caleb asked. Leora looked across hundreds of possible routes. For the first time in 4 years, no contract answered for her. "I do not know." Caleb smiled. "That sounds like a good start." For the next 2 days, Caleb did exactly what he had promised himself he would do. Nothing expensive. He rented the cheapest room Orion Gate offered, sent his employment record to 3 repair yards on Kepler Junction, and tried not to check berth 206 every time he crossed the station. The North Star departed on the first afternoon. Caleb watched from an observation corridor as the old cargo tug moved away under somebody else's registry signal. Her navigation lights turned toward the outer traffic lane, then became 2 small points against the stars. He kept the brass nameplate inside his duffel bag. That was enough. Leora spent those same 2 days learning what freedom required when nobody provided instructions. She opened an independent financial account, requested civilian identification, reviewed employment listings she was free to reject. The first offer came from an industrial station willing to pay excellent wages for Avery thermal system experience. She read the contract 3 times before realizing she could simply close it. So she did. The second offer included housing. She declined that one too. Not because it was bad, because she could. The experience felt almost irresponsible. On the second afternoon, she found herself standing before a transit terminal containing more destinations than she could read in one sitting. For 4 years, every departure had been an order. Now every route was a question. Her eyes stopped on Kepler Junction. She remembered Caleb mentioning a repair yard. Then she immediately looked away. Choosing his destination simply because he had freed her would turn gratitude into another kind of contract, even if neither of them called it one. She spent another hour studying routes. Agricultural colonies, research stations, Avery communities, human cities. She could go home. She could travel somewhere she had never seen. She could stay on Orion Gate. Nobody would stop her. That evening, she found Caleb sitting alone in a small observation lounge overlooking the docking ring. He had his toolkit open on the table and was repairing a broken portable heater belonging to the elderly station attendant. "You sold almost everything you owned," Leora said, approaching him, "and you are repairing someone else's heater for free." Caleb looked up. He asked nicely, "Your economic instincts remain concerning. I have received similar feedback." She sat across from him. The heater clicked, then began producing warm air. Caleb handed it back to the attendant, who thanked him and left. Leora watched until they were alone. "I found out what happened to the settlement credits." Caleb frowned. They were transferred to the contract holder. Not all of them. Orion Gate returned the unused processing reserve to the settler. Caleb opened his wrist terminal. A small refund had appeared in his account. "Well, look at that. I am financially irresponsible, but slightly less poor." Leora did not smile. "You could have kept assignment rights temporarily, recovered part of the settlement, released them later." "Yes. You knew that." The clerk explained it. "And you refused." Immediately, her golden eyes stayed on him. "Why?" Caleb closed the terminal. "Because temporary ownership is still ownership. You would never have treated me as property. Then I did not need paperwork saying I could." Silence settled between them. Outside the window, cargo lights drifted through space. Leora looked down at her bare wrist. "I spent 4 years learning that every kindness had a condition." That sounds exhausting. It was efficient. Those are not the same thing. The cyan markings near her temples brightened faintly. "No, I suppose they are not." Caleb leaned back. "Have you picked somewhere?" "Maybe." "That sounds suspiciously like progress." "I bought a ticket." Caleb smiled. "Good." He did not ask where. Leora noticed. "You are not curious?" "Extremely." "Then why are you not asking?" Caleb shrugged. "Because you spent 4 years having people demand your destination. I can survive another day without knowing." Leora looked through the observation glass. For the first time, freedom did not feel like a room without walls. It felt like having a door and knowing she alone decided when to open it. "Your liner leaves tomorrow morning," she said. Caleb nodded. "Gate 31. 8:20. You told me that at breakfast." "Did I?" "Yes." "Then apparently I talk too much." Leora stood. "That is one human trait I have confirmed." Caleb smiled. "Good night, Leora." She took several steps, then stopped. Caleb, yes. She looked back at him. Thank you. He started to answer, but she raised one blue hand. Do not make a joke. Caleb closed his mouth. Leora's expression softened. I am not thanking you because I owe you. I am thanking you because I choose to. Caleb nodded once. Then I choose to accept it. Leora walked away before he could see how brightly the cyan lines along her face had begun to glow. At 8:07 the next morning, Caleb stood beneath Gate 31 with one duffel bag, one compact tool kit, and the brass North Star nameplate tucked between three shirts that now represented most of his wardrobe. Beyond the observation glass, a civilian liner waited against Orion Gate's docking arm, broad and practical, and considerably less charming than the ship Caleb had called home for 12 years. He checked his boarding pass. Economy section. Shared cabin. One check bag. Coffee available for an additional fee. Civilization continues to decline, he muttered. Boarding began at 8:12. Caleb stayed near the window while passengers formed a line. He had received a message from a repair yard on Kepler Junction before breakfast. Interview approved. No guarantees. That was enough. Starting over had apparently become the theme of the week. At 8:16, Caleb looked toward the main concourse. He told himself he was checking the departure clock. At 8:17, he did it again. No cobalt blue face. No silver white hair. He felt something small settle inside him. Not disappointment. He refused to call it that. Leora had bought a ticket somewhere. She had chosen something because she wanted it. That was the ending he had paid for. The destination did not have to include him. Final boarding preparation for Kepler Junction, the gate system announced. Caleb lifted his duffel bag. Your new ship is considerably worse. He stopped. Leora stood behind him with a small travel bag over one shoulder. She wore a dark civilian jacket instead of the gray contract uniform. Nothing circled her wrist. Her golden diamond-shaped pupils reflected the gate lights, and the cyan markings along her cobalt blue temples glowed with unmistakable amusement. Caleb looked at her bag, then at her. You have been waiting to say that. Since yesterday. Worth it. Very. He glanced toward the departure display. Where are you going? Kepler Junction. Caleb was quiet for a second. There are hundreds of destinations on this station. I counted 214 that accepted civilian Avery passengers without additional transit permits. And you picked mine. No, Leora's answer came quickly enough to make him blink. She held up her boarding pass. I picked Kepler Junction. Caleb smiled faintly. Important distinction. Very. Why Kepler? Leora looked through the observation glass toward the liner. 3 repair yards are hiring thermal system specialists. Housing is affordable. The Avery community is small but established. Civilian employment protections are stronger than on Rook. She paused. And the coffee reviews are terrible. There it is. You are also going there. I suspected that might eventually appear on the list. Near the bottom. Naturally. Boarding opened. Caleb stepped toward the gate, then stopped. Leora, you know you do not have to do this. Her expression remained calm. Do what? Choose the same place because of what happened. I know. You do not owe me company. I know. You do not owe me repayment. Caleb, right? He stopped. Leora looked at him for a long moment. For 4 years, every destination came with somebody else's signature. Yesterday, I bought this ticket with my own account. She held it between 2 blue fingers. I read the terms. I chose the seat. I even rejected the travel insurance because it was overpriced. Caleb nodded solemnly. That last part makes you practically human. The cyan markings along her face brightened. I chose Kepler Junction because it offers work I want, laws I trust more, and a future I can leave if I dislike it. She looked directly at him. And yes, because someone I would like to know better is going there too. Caleb did not answer immediately. He did not need to. They passed through the gate side by side. Inside the boarding corridor, the path divided between standard cabins and an observation deck. Leora stopped at the junction. For years, someone else had selected every route before she reached it. Now 2 arrows waited silently. Caleb looked at her. Which way? Leora studied both signs, then pointed toward the observation deck. That one. Any particular reason? I want to see Orion Gate disappear. Caleb gestured ahead. Lead the way. She did. He followed. Beyond the glass, stars opened around the station as the liner prepared for departure. Caleb had spent everything he owned, but he had never purchased Leora, her gratitude, or the future beside him. He had paid only to destroy the contract that claimed those things could have a price. The first ticket she bought for herself proved the difference. Nobody owned where she went next. Nobody ever would again.